The Black Sea has always been a tinderbox waiting to be ignited. Even in the Cold War, I think 1986, so ostensibly the time when, we're talking with the Russians and all that, there was an incident off of Crimea where a Russian destroyer rammed a U.S. cruiser because it got too close to the side. And we were playing up until the very end, we're playing stupid games that we always play in terms of rushing the Crimea Peninsula just to generate a Soviet, later on a Russian response, etc. But the reality is there's no place in the Black Sea for a NATO fleet to hide. Russia has the control of the Black Sea coastline to the depth of the Black Sea. If there was a naval engagement, every NATO ship in the Black Sea would be sunk. That's an absolute certainty. And some nations recognize this, like Turkey. It said, we ain't going to be escorting any green deals. We're not going down that path. And so, Russian control of the Black Sea is a reality that people have to adapt to. It's one thing to test Russia during a so-called Cold War. It's another thing to test Russia during a hot war. And anybody who talks about flexing muscle right now, you're basically just saying you want to create a condition that inevitably leads to the defeat of the United States in the Black Sea and potential for nuclear conflict because of that defeat. The grain deal was always a mechanism that did everything but support the hungry and the underdeveloped portions of the world. It was a deal designed to enrich Ukraine. They made a lot of money off of this. It was a deal designed to keep food prices low in Europe. That's, number one destination for this grain was Europe. And even if people need to understand that, like in the United Kingdom, none of that grain went to the United Kingdom. So they're like, well, how does that affect UK food prices? Well, because the United Kingdom buys food on the market and commodity prices shot up. And that's the reality. When this grain deal is working, commodity prices are stable, they're low. When this grain deal isn't working, commodity prices rise. And when commodity prices rise, that means that fish and chips cost more for the British consumer, even though Britain doesn't directly. But the other people impacted, and this is where it gets into the developing world. The vast majority of the food, it's misleading for people to say that because the food didn't go to the underdeveloped world, therefore there was no benefit to the underdeveloped world. No, that's a misleading statement, because most of the world food programs don't deal with receiving food donations and providing those food donations to those in need. They deal with them getting a budget allotment. They get money, and they use that money to buy food or food products that are prepared and bring it in. So when commodity prices go up, the price of food goes up, but these budgets remain the same, which means that if I'm planning on feeding the starving people of Africa and I have $10 million, suddenly if the prices go up, my $10 million is buying far less than what it used to buy, which means I have far less product for those people in need. And this is where there is a detrimental impact on the world population. But again, it's not Russia's fault. This grain deal was a deal, and there are a couple things about it. One, Russia was supposed to be able to ship grain without any obstacles. Russia was supposed to be able to ship fertilizer without. Fertilizer is an important element, even more important in many ways than the actual food at this juncture, because the food that's being shipped now isn't going to be going to the needy. It has to be processed and all that. There's already food out there in warehouses waiting to be bought. The high prices will impact that. But what happens if you don't have the crops in, and if the land hasn't been fertilized properly, your crop output is going to diminish drastically. And that's the problem. Russia's been saying we need to get this fertilizer out there. But they put roadblock after roadblock in the way of Russian fertilizer. There was an ammonia pipeline, ammonia being one of the raw products, raw ingredients for, I guess it's nitrogen-based fertilizers. They blew it. The Ukrainians blew up the pipeline. Russia, even if they did everything, they can't do it because they've been cut off a banking system. So, Russia can't be involved in any transactions related to any of the activities that they were allowed to do. They weren't allowed to do them, but if they were allowed to do them, they still couldn't, do them because of the banking. So Russia's been been doing nothing. And Russia said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not allowing the situation. But what really pushed Russia over the edge was the fact that the Ukrainians were using this grain deal to do two things. One, to create a safe zone in the greater Odessa region, where they knew the Russians wouldn't be attacking out of fear of disrupting the grain thing. And so they have warehouses full of equipment, military equipment, things supporting the front. So it became this logistics hub for not only supporting the front lines, but carrying out attacks against Crimea. The vast majority of the drone attacks against Crimea come from the Odessa area, from drones that are operating from airfields within the so-called protected space. The same thing with the attack that took place on both attacks, in fact, on the Kerch Bridge. The first attack, the suicide truck bomb, I think the Russians are convinced that those explosives were shipped out of Odessa as part of the under the cover of the grain deal. And the underwater drone attack that took place, the Russians believe Ukrainians deployed from one of the ships that was transiting the so-called green corridor, the protected corridors. And so Russia is saying no more. We're not going to allow this to happen. So they're shutting her down. They not just withdrew from the grain deal, but they're ensuring that Ukrainian ports can't participate in any effort to ship grain outside of the framework, or even if the grain deal comes back, Russia's degrading the Ukrainian capabilities. This is punishment for Ukraine because of what they've done. Russia will find other ways to get its grain to the market. Those nations in need will have access to Russian grain, but Russia's just not going to play the corrupt UN game anymore. The United States is upping its game, so to speak, when it comes to its nuclear posture vis-a-vis the defense of South Korea and Japan. This is largely in response to North Korea's continued development of nuclear missiles that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, which North Korea has produced. Some people say 180, some people say 200. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's more than one. And the United States has made some talk about using nuclear weapons against North Korea, et cetera. I think what the Russians and the Chinese are doing is creating a framework of collective self-defense that involves North Korea as a mechanism of deterring any precipitous American action. That is, by saying that we stand with North Korea, that an attack on North Korea, they haven't said this yet, but I think this is the direction they're moving in. An attack against North Korea is an attack against us all. If you go to war against North Korea, it could become a regional conflict immediately. And maybe that'll serve as a chilling effect on U.S. policy.